If you're Zack Snyder, how do you follow up a successful reboot of Superman with Man of Steel? Well, you immediately announce a sequel and tease it 5 weeks later at Comic-Con 2013. I wish I was kidding with this one too, but it did make perfect sense at the time. Comic-Con was just weeks after Man of Steel's release, and with the film at the height of its cultural popularity, Hollywood definitely is a system where you gotta strike where the iron is hot, and what better way to do it than to tease a sequel right off the bat? Hell, this is Warner Brothers' kind of go-to, seeing as just a mere 3 days after Wonder Woman 1984 debuted on HBO Max, stateside at least, and in some theaters internationally, they announced that Wonder Woman 3 would be coming sometime in the future. This was obviously done as a way to keep the hype alive and to show faith in the property. However, when Henry Lennox took the stage in Hall H at SDCC and recited the iconic passage from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, it set the internet ablaze with anticipation and excitement. If you've never heard it before, here is that clip in full.
I have a friend with me, Harry Lennox. Harry Lennox was in Man of Steel, and the reason I brought him out is because his voice is just way better than mine. No, he's gonna come right here. Now what he's gonna read you a little thing. He's gonna read a little thing, and some of you will recognize it, and we're not adapting this thing, but it is the thing that will help tell that story. So if we could, actually just like a spotlight would be cool on the lectern. Is that, okay, hang on. Harry, let's see. All right, now let's get.
I want you to remember, Clark, in all the years to come, in all your most private moments, I want you to remember my hand at your throat. I want you to remember the one man who beat you.
That speech rang the bell that DC fans have been hoping for since, I don't know, forever. That speech proved that the Nolanverse of Batman films was over with, and we were getting something new with the Caped Crusader, which was a little bit odd in retrospect considering that it had only been a year since The Dark Knight Rises came out. However, since that movie is generally referred to as the weakest of the trilogy, and a lot of people just didn't like it, it was the right time to probably announce something good. And at that moment, July 14th, 2013, it did feel like anything was really possible for Zack Snyder and the DCEU. God, if only that were true. This is the story of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And following the release of Man of Steel on June 14, 2013, Warner Brothers came right out and announced that Man of Steel 2 would be the next film from Zack Snyder and David Goyer. And I mean, this was like 2 days after the release of Man of Steel 2. It makes sense as Man of Steel did go on to gross over $110 million in its opening weekend, and Warner Brothers was obviously feeling pretty good and decided to pull the trigger publicly. The same team was poised to return to the DCEU world, with Christopher Nolan once again producing. Funnily enough, while Zack Snyder did say at Comic-Con that his new Superman movie would take elements from The Dark Knight Rises, screenwriter David Goyer had completely dumped on that idea a mere 7 years earlier. Leading up to the release of Nolan's Batman Begins, Goyer, who was the screenwriter on that film, did say that if you were to pit Batman versus Superman, it would show that you were basically at the creative end of these characters and that you've quote-unquote exhausted all possibilities. But hey, this is Hollywood and things change, especially when Zack Snyder's enthusiasm for these characters are at play. When it came to the decision to bring Batman into this world, this is what Zack himself said in an interview. After Man of Steel finished and we started talking about what would be in the next movie, I started subtly mentioning that it would be cool if he faced Batman. You're in a story meeting talking about, like, who should Superman fight? If he fought this giant alien threat Zod, who was basically his equal physically, from his planet, fighting on our turf. You know, who to fight next. But I'm not going to say at all that when I took the job to do Man of Steel that I did it in a subversive way to get to Batman. I really believe that only contemplating who could face Superman did Batman come into the picture. Now, I can't help but wonder if this idea came from watching I Am Legend back in 2007, when Francis Lawrence included a Batman vs. Superman Easter egg. I mean, this was a pretty big deal back when I Am Legend came out. This was between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, and remember that The Dark Knight's opening bank robbery scene was included in the IMAX screenings of I Am Legend, so that Easter egg was doubly important at the time. Here's how Screen Rant described the Batman v Superman Easter egg coming to be in the movie. They say, as confirmed by I Am Legend director Francis Lawrence a few months after the release of Batman v Superman, the Batman-Superman movie logo being included in I Am Legend is sort of an in-joke. Screenwriter and producer Akiva Goldsman had actually been hired to pen the script for a potential Batman-Superman crossover movie in the early 2000s, but that project was shelved and Warner Brothers went on to produce Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy instead, and Bryan Singer's Superman Returns a few years later. Lawrence and Goldman simply thought it would be funny to pretend that such a crossover film had actually been made in the I Am Legends world. Who knew that 9 years later we'd finally get to see that quote-unquote in-joke get played out, but from an entirely different team of people. Hollywood works in mysterious ways sometimes. Anyways, Zack and David continued to bang out the script until towards the end of the year when Goyer had to exit the project over scheduling conflicts, and Chris Terrio got brought in to take it over the finish line. In my Podio commentary episode of Man of Steel, I mentioned how Zack Snyder didn't want to approach these characters in the same way a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie would. He wanted to play on the mythology of these heroes and build from that. Chris Terrio completely shared in his vision, and in an interview with Forbes magazine, he explained how he was going to treat Batman being introduced into a world where Superman existed. He says, in superhero stories, Batman is Pluto, god of the underworld, and Superman is Apollo, god of the sky. That began to be really interesting to me, that their conflict is not just due to manipulation, but their very existence. This makes sense to me, and it gives me a deeper love of how these characters were portrayed in BVS. I've always loved Greek mythology and the stories that come from it. Whether or not you believe they actually existed, the morality tales that came from them were and are timeless. And it's always fun to see their philosophies explored in a modern setting, especially with the new gods of pop culture mythology. When it comes to the themes of this movie, I think a lot of people picked up on the not so subtle nod to 9/11. That's not to say that this was a bad thing though. I think the idea of what would happen after the events of Man of Steel was a great place to explore, and that opening sequence was straight fire, and a fantastic way to show us the human experience of what happened when the world met Superman. The fallout after 9/11 did get us the terrible Patriot Act, the Department of Homeland Security, and the most annoying airport security theater ever. The movie somewhat explores the aftermath with how Batman responds to this new threat. There is a great line from Alfred where he says the feeling of powerlessness that turns good men cruel is a fantastic commentary on our society. Some might disagree, but having spent my post-adolescent years in a post-9/11 world, I've seen people change because they are angry, and most importantly, afraid of it ever happening again. Seeing those themes represented in a comic book movie is fantastic because it shows that some themes are universally transferable and relatable. Now, the official name for Batman v Superman was finally announced on May 21st, 2014, and it caught people off guard at first, 100%. A lot of people immediately thought back to the 2007 I Am Legend Easter egg, but Zack made sure to clarify the title by saying that the V in Batman v Superman wasn't meant to indicate a straight-up versus film, even if it was in that wheelhouse. However, they did want people to know that this wasn't Man of Steel 2. Yes, we know, Zack, we've all been waiting 8 years for a Man of Steel 2, and hopefully with the success of the Snyder Cut on HBO Max, we'll actually get one. But the first set of controversies to strike Batman v Superman came in its casting. Shortly after the San Diego Comic-Con announcement, Ben Affleck was announced to have been cast as Bruce Wayne in Batman in August of 2013. This was actually met with a lot of online pushback from people who just looked at his performance in Daredevil from 2003 and wrote him off as like a one-note celebrity. I was actually one of the first people to come out publicly, through YouTube videos by the way, to support Ben in the role, and I'm quite happy to say that I've been right on that front for nearly a decade now. Another big controversy was actually the casting of Gal Gadot as Diana Prince. This one was way more controversial for a couple of reasons. The biggest one is that people were skeptical of Gal being an unknown actress outside of the Fast and Furious franchise, and for being a bit on the skinny side. Online critics were upset that she wasn't Amazonian enough for them, and I think many of them wanted some kind of Lucy Lawless Xena Warrior Princess hybrid to take on the character. But Gal, you know what, ultimately won them all over. Well, with the exception of a few anti-Semites, but we don't need to dive into that. Once again, I was on board with this casting from the beginning. I always supported Gal as Wonder Woman. I always felt she had a soft but strong presence that could very much bring that character to life and be relatable to the fan base. And just like Ben Affleck, I was proven right. Once again, not trying to toot my own horn or nothing. Additionally, the casting of Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor was definitely one that caused a stir. A lot of people never saw Jesse as a villain, and not one that would be as intimidating as Gene Hackman or the Superman animated series portrayal of the head of LexCorp. On the subject of casting Jesse Eisenberg as Lex, this is what Zack had to say about it in an interview. He said, "Lex Luthor is often considered the most notorious of Superman rivals, his unsavory reputation preceding him since 1940. What's great about Lex is that he exists beyond the confines of the stereotypical nefarious villain. He's a complicated and sophisticated character whose intellect, wealth, and prominence position him as one of the few mortals able to challenge the incredible might of Superman. Having Jesse in the role allows us to explore that interesting dynamic and also take the character in some new and unexpected directions." And Zack was right. Jesse's version of Lex is one that uses his intellect to distract and ultimately play Batman and Superman against each other. And I do think that audiences really gave him a chance once they saw him, in the Ultimate Edition that is, which we'll definitely talk about here in a bit. My personal favorite casting choice was Jeremy Irons as Alfred. Having grown up watching Michael Gough play him in the 4 films during the 80s and 90s, Irons seemed to have that kind of fatherly approach. Not that Michael Caine did a bad job or anything. He was wonderful in the role, but I enjoyed Irons' more hands-on Alfred than in any other iteration we'd seen before. He was not only Bruce's father figure, but partner in crime and his conscience at the same time. Now with the cast locked in, it was time to start making this massive film. Zack brought back cinematographer Larry Fong, who had previously worked with him on 300, Watchmen, and Sucker Punch. The very first thing that they filmed together was the football match between Gotham City University and Metropolis State University for Cyborg's backstory. This was shot at the East Los Angeles College, and from there they jumped halfway across the country to Detroit for principal photography in May of 2014. During this phase of production, they filmed around other parts of Michigan and back in Chicago for a few things, and then it was off to New Mexico for the Morocco location shoot. Originally, they wanted to film in Morocco, but this was changed last minute because of the 2014 Ebola outbreak. So they dodged a hell of a bullet on that one. Once shooting wrapped in December 2014, it was time to get the movie ready for its first release date of July 2015. However, this didn't stick, and the movie was then pushed all the way back to May 6th, 2016. The reason given for this was to give Zack time to fully realize his vision, given the complex nature of the story. This is actually a constant issue when it comes to Zack Snyder and Warner Brothers. In my opinion, Zack works best in the long form, and that doesn't always jive with what Warner Brothers and General Studios want to do. Look at the whole situation involving Justice League. There's a lot more I'm going to say about that in future episodes, but I'm going to hold off for right now. It's not that it's not important to the story, but it's more in line for Zack Snyder's Justice League rather than BVS. But then the film ended up hitting another release date snag, while they had chosen the release date of May 6th first. Kevin Feige and Disney decided to drop Captain America Civil War on that date too. At first, Warner Brothers says it wasn't going to flinch, that it wasn't going to budge, that it was going to stare down the MCU and play that game of chicken. To many of us fans out there, this was actually a pretty exciting time because we were thinking that we were going to get both Captain America 3 and BVS on the same day. But this is Hollywood, and that sort of thing never happens. And as usual, Warner Brothers blinked and opted to push up the release date to March 25th, 2016. There's also this weird conspiracy that Jeff Johns leaked the information to Kevin Feige about Batman v Superman, and that Feige and Johns were working together to undermine Zack's visions for his films. While I don't believe this personally, what happened after the film's release kind of makes it seem like this subversion effort worked, but more on that here in a minute. I was actually really happy about this date change, seeing as my birthday is March 26th, and I knew exactly what I was going to be doing for my special day that year. As us fans then waited for this movie to come out, Warner Brothers started to heavily market the film. Both Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman on the screen at the same time was sure to make it a billion-dollar-plus feature. This was expected to be a phenomenon of epic proportions that even Marvel couldn't accomplish. What can I say? Expectations were really high amongst fans, and this was only fueled by an August 2015 rumor that came out that said that Zack Snyder had screened this film for the suit and ties over at Warner Brothers, and they were so impressed that they gave it a standing ovation. I'm not kidding, this was an actual scoop from 8 months before the film's official release, and this piece of information weaseled its way into those high expectations fans already had for the movie. But the big takeaway from the rumor was that Ben Affleck impressed the suits the most, and that the powers that be decided to increase his deal. Personally, I believe this rumor is true, because it was not long after where we started hearing reports of a Ben Affleck directed Batman movie where Deathstroke was the villain. Trust me, that news made some nips so hard they could cut glass. Okay, well, look, it at least made my nips so hard they could cut glass. But I digress. There are two quick side notes I want to touch upon when talking about the pre-release of this film. One is the second trailer for the movie, which they showed Doomsday. I still don't get why they did this. I don't understand why they'd put that reveal in the trailer. There was fan outrage against the usage of Doomsday at this point in the DCEU, and maybe Warner's was just getting people ready for it. Kind of like how David Ayer released the first image of the Joker in the summer of 2015 to give people time to get used to how Jared Leto would look with that damaged tattoo on his forehead. I don't know, it's just a theory. But the other thing is that the leaking of the teaser trailer happened. In April 2015, Zack Snyder announced that the teaser for BVS would be playing in select IMAX theaters and that the space was limited, so you had to reserve your seat. This was one of those weird-ass promo things that even Marvel did with Guardians of the Galaxy in the summer of 2014. I mean, like, I get why studios do this, but I don't know if I'd go to the theater just for an IMAX trailer of the movie. Not even a full trailer either, but like a teaser. However, none of that really mattered because literally the next day, on April 16th, 2015, the trailer leaked online. This seems to be a problem with Zack Snyder. It always feels like he either has really bad luck or someone at Warner Brothers is undermining him at every turn. But as a fan of Man of Steel and an ardent Zack Snyder supporter, I was ready to see this movie, and on March 24th, 2016, my girlfriend and I went to a preview night screening as an early birthday present for myself. And I was pretty disappointed. I didn't hate it, but so much left my head scratching that it just took me out of the experience. There was something off about the editing and the pacing that it just didn't make much sense to me. And I wasn't the only one. So many fans out there felt left down, and they really couldn't figure out why. Case in point, I went out to lunch with some friends a couple days later, and right before I left, I saw that Warner's had released a 59-second clip of the FBI raiding the scout ship and arresting Lex as he was communicating with Steppenwolf. This was a cool scene and one that should have been in the movie. I sent that clip to my friend before going to meet up with him, and when he saw it, he was furious. Why? Because that scene should have been in the movie. It explains so much and why it was important to the story, especially the story going forward. So we opined about why it was missing, and we talked about just how a day or two before our meeting, Warner Brothers had announced this collector's edition of Batman v Superman, which was coming in an R-rated extended edition in just a couple months. I mean, considering how well Zack usually does in the longer form with his films, I was excited to see this version, and I didn't give the theatrical cut another thought. I don't believe I was alone in that either, because the second week drop for Batman v Superman was devastating, and it showed just how bad the movie was playing with fans and the general audience. Rotten Tomatoes had it listed at 28%, and even the cinema score was not kind. The movie got a B rating, which is not good. Even with the $166 million opening weekend, bad reviews and poor word of mouth really hurt the film going forward, and it ultimately came up short with only $873 million worldwide, whereas Captain America Civil War grossed over $1.15 billion worldwide. Now look, I know comparing the two isn't fair, but it shows you the difference between when a studio believes in its properties and when it doesn't. Warner Brothers clearly didn't, as evidenced by the Steppenwolf clip being cut from the final film. And I'll be honest with you guys, after the opening of Batman v Superman, I made a video where I urged people to spoil it for themselves going in. I still stand by that for the theatrical cut as well. I believe that people needed to know what they were in for, and by spoiling it, they could be prepared for what they were going to see, and maybe look to the future, because we knew at that point Justice League was already in production and filming in London. Now, the fallout over Batman v Superman hit Zack Snyder pretty hard. Not long after the movie came out to that devastating critical score and less than stellar final box office trajectory, Zack lost control of the DCEU, which was then placed in the hands of Jeff Johns and John Berg. Those two, along with Kevin Tushihara, the former head of Warner Brothers Pictures, were definitely thorns in Zack Snyder's side. But thankfully, they aren't there anymore. Finally, the Batman v Superman Ultimate Edition hit digital in June 2016, which is when I got to sit down and watch the film with the additional 31 minutes. And I'll just say this. This was the far superior version. And I wasn't the only one to think this either. In fact, the movie spent 5 weeks at the top of the home video charts when it was released on Blu-ray the following month. And ultimately, it ended up earning Warner Brothers an additional $80.5 million. Yeah, that's less than Man of Steel's home video take home, but we're not taking into account the digital sales that were racking up a month before the physical release. And with the release of Zack Snyder's Justice League this week on HBO Max, they are releasing the remastered version of BVS in the original IMAX aspect ratio on the same day. And next week, the 4K will be available to purchase as well. So I know what I'm buying myself for my early birthday present this year. Look, there is a legacy for Batman v Superman that isn't fully discussed. While the film didn't have the same issues that Justice League did a year later, it did reveal just how bad things were at Warner Brothers and how little faith they had in Zack as time went on. Sadly, the amount of meddling they did only fell on Zack's head at the time, and he, being the team player that he is, took everything on the chin. In many ways, a lot of us do owe Zack Snyder an apology for our initial reactions to Batman v Superman. It wasn't his fault in the end. He was overridden by executives who wanted to get more screenings per day rather than tell a meaningful story. And I definitely agree with Humberto Gonzalez, who said on Collider following the Ultimate Edition's release, he said that Warner Brothers left about $250 million on the table with that terrible theatrical cut. And he's right. Zack Snyder is kind of like the embodiment of the message from Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. Or to quote Sir Christopher Wren's inscription, if you seek his monument, look around you. To me, the legacy of Batman v Superman is something that opened the door to the wider DCEU, and it made a lot of tepid fans diehard fans. There's a reason why the Snyder Cut movement has grown over the years. People will sit there and talk about the terribleness of the 2017 theatrical cut of Justice League, and then fans will go, but watch the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman. And a lot of people look at that and they go, yeah, you're right. That was actually really, really, really good. And then the fans, like us, can go, yeah, because the studio interfered and they made it something that they shouldn't have done because they wanted money. And that played in quite a bit to Justice League 2017, which we'll be talking about in that episode of Podio commentary. But in the meantime, I am curious to know your guys' thoughts on this. How did you feel about Batman v Superman when you first saw it? Is it a movie that lives up to your expectations all these years later? And are you looking forward to Zack Snyder's Justice League this week? Please let me know in the comment section here on YouTube. If you guys haven't already, please check it out on podcasts, iTunes, and Spotify, and leave a review where you can. And also find me on Twitter at mjarbo and recommend a movie you'd like me to cover for a future episode of Podio commentary. I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great day. Thank you for watching, and peace out.